welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my glorious, wonderful, beautiful co host, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm having the greatest day of my life so far.
Excellent, amazing, astounding, uh, jealousy inducing, perhaps. Anthony, I've been working on some projects, shocking nobody, absolutely no one. A lot of them are horror related. I do consider horror as in pure horror, its own kind of genre, or at least its own corner of a spectrum. So you have like the political compass, right? Right, left, libertarian, authoritarian. Um, However that works, I don't actually pay attention to it. But to me, horror is a sort of a tag on that axis. Uh, so you have, things that are pure horror, like say H.P. Lovecraft, but then on the other end, you have things that are not full of horror, like say a children's book. Um, and then you have a lot of things sort of on the line there. Like most children's book, uh, they don't really uh, like they can have horror in them. There are children's books with horror in them. But if you picked up, say, something like, a Paddington story, like there's no horror in Paddington Bear. At least I don't know of any. You never know. He might be secretly murdering the families he goes with because it seems like a new family every movie. But then you look at things like, uh, since we're talking about bears, The Revenant, which does have aspects of horror with it, especially with that bear that keeps showing up and trying to eat Leonardo DiCaprio. So that's well on the horror spectrum, but it's not as far as something like H.P. Lovecraft. Robert E. Howard and a few other things also have a lot of horror, but they're kind of in the action adventure mode. So, like, if you can imagine H.P. Lovecraft on one end, if there's like an action, non action axis as well, like Robert E. Howard is like in the action corner and the horror corner where they meet more often than not. Jurassic Park is a horror movie and a slasher film, in fact, just with a sci-fi flair, so on and so forth. So one of the things I've been thinking about is projects not just outside Pinkerton's Ghosts, but sort of like where I can push horror in my own writing, how to keep up a certain amount of tension. One of the things I don't really like is when things are just a little weird. You know what I mean? Like in a Stephen King movie or book or whatever. It's like the town is just a little weird. There's this story I kind of hate every time it's described to me. It doesn't make me want to read it. Called Baraska, where they build up this horror tied to this town and these mines and these disappeared miners and all these kids who disappear and the sound of the mine meaning that a kid's dead or something and uh, quite frankly, it comes down to a whole lot of nothing. Turns out the town patriarch is evil. Who ever heard of a thing? And like it's a special horror because what they're doing is they're basically kidnapping uh, women and turning them into breeding machines because somebody poisoned the water supply and it turned all the men infertile, except for the ones who could afford bottled water, which I'm not exaggerating one bit. Uh,
Yeah, that's pretty dumb.
Yeah, and it's like, oh wow, like Windigoon loves the story, and I have no idea why. Like maybe I need to read it, but every time I read a synopsis of it, because I always read synopsises before I really get into anything, uh, just sounds terrible. Sounds absolutely atrocious because it's like you have this build up, and
What's it titled?
Baraska, Borrasca, Like I actually got into some
Oh,
internet
it's like
fights
a
over it.
it's like sort of like what we do, the podcast thing. Okay.
No, well he does a couple of different podcasts now. Windigoon does.
When I look up Baraska, it says it's a horror, audio, drama, and podcast series,
Since when?
but based on her short stories of the same name, which she published on Reddit.
Oh, okay.
Also, it stars Cole Sprouse, which is really funny. That's the guy from Zack and Cody.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
So it's famous. I thought we were just talking about I don't know.
yeah, I feel
It's
like you
dumb.
probably confused something.
No, the plot works out. The only thing that people were telling me were about the novella. And it's like it's sad because it's like, hey, this is a Missouri thing. Missouri's full of horror, quiet horror everywhere, never ending. Uh, but it's like I don't know. It wants to be something that it isn't, and the plot just doesn't work out for it. Like the thing that I'm working on, like the like it's a novel. Let me see, what did I call it? And I need to go over it sometime and sort of see what uh, see what goes on with it. Let me see. I should have picked up the name already because I know what the plot is. Eh,
I do not know where you're going with this, so
neither
I
do
can't help
I.
you.
Neither do I. I'm trying
All
to.
right, so while you're doing that, I'll mention before I did Pinkerton's Ghosts, I
There
would
it
not
is.
have said that I was a huge horror fan, though there were horror authors I was a fan of and horror stories that I enjoyed. My favorite horror author is, unsurprisingly, probably Edgar Allan Poe. Uh, to this day, my favorite horror story is The Fall of the House of Usher. You can find some, shall we call it, remnants of that in my story, Castle Manor Mystery. There's hints of House of Usher in there. But Poe is just a really, really entertaining writer. One of the things I like about Poe is that in some of his stories, sure, there is a point. I don't want to say that he's always pure pulp, but in a story like House of Usher, I honestly don't really think it's trying to say anything, but pretty freaky, isn't it? It's
That's
like,
pretty
what is the
weird.
message? Yeah, what is the message of the fall of the House of Usher? Like, don't I don't even know. I can't think of anything. I think the story just like would be pretty freaky if this happened, wouldn't it? Uh, and he is correct. It would indeed be very freaky if I went to visit my sick friend's house and then his sister was buried alive, came back to life, and at their death, his house collapsed. Uh, which, by the way, I have just fully summarized the fall of the House of Usher.
Yeah.
Uh, that was the entire story.
Yeah.
That's why I love Poe. Uh, another great horror story. Uh, that is not by Poe, but I think same or similar era. Jack London. So we didn't end up having a Halloween stream this year because you were sick.
Yeah.
But we were planning on it in advance, and the story I was planning on reading for this year's Halloween stream was actually a Jack London story. Jack London is most famous for The Call of the Wild. He's one of those, old timey manly men's writers.
Yeah.
Uh, the kind of guy who you read his life story and he's lived the life of 10 men, and then he writes about all of the exciting adventures and things he did in the wilderness. That
Yeah.
sort of guy. That's Jack London. Uh,
Yeah.
Hemingway is of a similar type, but I prefer London. Uh, so, anyway, London wrote a short story that a lot of us have probably read in school but have never really thought of as a horror story, even though I would argue it is absolutely a horror story. That is To Build a Fire.
Oh yeah,
I People, for some reason, it's not thought of as a horror story by people. It absolutely should be. To Build a Fire is a horror story.
yeah,
Uh, and To Build a Fire is a brilliant horror story. There are two versions of it. He rewrote it and improved it greatly in the retelling. In the original version of the story, the protagonist survives, which does not really work,
yep,
right? It doesn't work. And to London's credit, he knew this, and the more famous version is his rewrite where the protagonist dies, right?
yes,
You have to kill off the protagonist in order to get across that this is a story that very much has a point, right?
right,
Unlike with Poe, To Build a Fire has a very real and very important point. So, To Build a Fire, if, for people who don't know, is about a man who decides he's going to go off and travel in the Alaskan wilderness in the middle of winter. And he is warned in advance not to do it because it gets really, really, really cold in the Alaskan wilderness in the middle of winter, which is shocking, I know, but it's true. And he is warned not to do it, but he dismisses it, saying that it's fine. He'll just build a fire, right? There's no problem. So there's no problem.
right,
He traipses off into the wilderness. It is worse than he expected, but he is still confident because he has realized that all he has to do is build the fire, and he'll be fine. So he gathers all of his stuff. His hands are already starting to get a little, starting to become a little bit difficult to manipulate the old digits. Uh, he builds his fire, and it works. So it seems like everything is okay, except that the man has made a fatal miscalculation. He has set the fire up under a tree, and because he set the fire up under a tree, the heat has melted the snow on the branches above him, and it falls onto and puts out the fire.
yep,
So, this is where you kind of start to realize, oh wait, this is actually really bad. And the rest of the story is the man's more and more desperate attempts to try and get the fire started, and then when it ends with the man realizes that there is nothing he can do anymore because he can't move his hands, right? He can
yep,
no longer manipulate any of his things. The fire is not starting, and the storm is not slowing down. Uh, his last two ideas are he decides to try running because running keeps you warm, uh, right? But
yep,
this, of course, also wastes energy, so it's really not a good idea. But your first thought at this point is warmth, not energy, even though energy is technically speaking the more important thing. Uh, he runs, and this, it's not really doing anything. And then his final thought is he looks at his dog and realizes that if he kills the dog, he can stick his hands in the dog. Sort of like what Luke Skywalker does in Empire Strikes Back with the monster. Yeah. Um, and he runs to kill the dog and trips and falls and dies. And then the story ends with the dog just kind of staring at the man and then shrugging his shoulders and going, well, it didn't look like he was going to move again. And the dog runs off into the wilderness. Because dogs, in the end, are animals and they are part of the wild, and man is not. And that is the message of the story: is that however, however talented, strong, whatever a man thinks he is, uh, they you will be humbled in the face of nature if you don't take it with if you don't treat it with the respect it deserves.
yep,
Uh, the other, of course, message of To Build a Fire is that the cold is one of the most horrifying things in existence. Man fears the cold. It's one of the primal fears, right?
yep,
Uh, and the cold will kill you. Uh, it is a brilliant short story. What makes it work, though, is it is the inevitability of the approaching dread, right? That this is why it had to end with the man dying. If it ended with the man living, it would not be nearly as powerful.
Yeah.
Uh, it makes me think of I was when Hurricane Sandy hit. I live in New Jersey. Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey. We knew Hurricane Sandy was coming for about a week, right?
Yeah.
Like we all knew that Hurricane Sandy was going to hit, and it did not matter like at all. It still completely decimated the tri-state area, especially like New Jersey and New York, were still completely decimated by a hurricane that we knew was coming. Right, like that we knew it was coming,
Right.
and it didn't matter because in the end, there's a certain I'm trying to think of how to put this exactly. So there's a certain paganistic idea here, which you could take it in that way, right? Of like, man is always going to man thinks he's so great, but in the end, he's always inferior to Mother Nature,
Yeah.
right? And that's a sort of pagan idea, but there it doesn't need to be that way, right? Like you could also think of it in a Christian way, which is this concept of humility. God controls nature. We control what we control, and God controls nature, right?
Yep.
If God wants to destroy all we have built up in a moment, he can and he will,
Yep.
right? Uh, Hurricane Sandy is that message, and it's also that message in To Build a Fire. Man, is rightly proud of his accomplishments, although perhaps not rightly, as we see in the story of Babel. But man is proud of his accomplishments and his mastery over nature. But we must never forget that nature is under the domain of God, and God can choose to do what He wills with it. And
Right.
we are ultimately powerless in its wake. That's the Christian view of it. I'm not sure what London would have viewed it as, if he would have viewed it in a sort of animalistic, paganistic way, or if he would have viewed it in the Christian way. But either way, I think that there is a very real message that you could get out of it. It reminds me too. You know Gary Paulson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very very famous author. Died relatively recently, like within the last 5 or 10 years or so.
Hatchet.
Uh, yep, Hatchet. Gary Paulson has one of my favorite technically nonfiction books. I call it technically because, like my other favorite nonfiction book by Roald Dahl, probably a lot of it was made up. Uh, However, it's so entertaining that you don't really care. Uh, he has a book called Winter Dance, which is about his first running of the Iditarod. So Paulson ran 2 Iditarods, and then he was told he had heart issues, and his doctor told him to stop doing it, and that's what ended it. Uh, but Winter Dance is one of my favorite nonfiction books ever. Uh, and Paulson is one of those guys. He's a really, really fascinating guy. Like,
Yeah.
he's written a ridiculous amount of books about wildly different subjects, but he's most famous for his survivalist type stuff, like Hatchet,
Yeah.
right? Because that's was his life. And he used to he tells some stories both in Winter Dance and then his other autobiography about his younger years called Guts, which I also recommend. Uh, which is about how he grew up and was basically like he would just go and camp out in the wilderness for weeks at a time and hunt, right? Uh,
Yeah.
he tells a few stories that is about like this concept of nature and things, and Paulson seems to view it in a more animalistic way, like old style paganism.
Yeah.
Uh, like for example, he talks about how he once how on his running of the Iditarod, he sees a guy kick his dog to death with a steel toed boot. And Paulson says in Winter Dance, he goes, "If I had had my gun with me, I would have killed him." Right, like he says, I would have killed him. He goes, as it stood, I was holding my hatchet with me, and I very seriously considered the idea.
Yeah.
Uh, he goes, ultimately, I reported him, and he was banned from all races, like ever again. But there's something. Don't get me wrong. It's not that you're going to ever be on the side of a man who kicks a dog to death. That's remarkably cruel,
Yeah.
right? Like, and especially in the Iditarod when these dogs are your life, which Paulson explains. But there's also something wrong about putting a human life on the level of an animal life. That's incorrect,
Yes.
right? Uh, it's understandable, especially in the moment, and I doubt that anybody would have been too upset because the sort of man capable of that type of cruelty to an animal that is that useful is probably a cruel man
Yes.
outside of that, you know. Nevertheless, like it is not an appropriate
Untrustworthy.
response.
Almost
What was that?
certainly, almost certainly, likely to betray you if it benefited him. That sort of thing.
Yes. Like this man is almost certainly a sociopath, right?
Exactly.
Uh Now, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that anybody would have really lost sleep over it. Yet, nevertheless, we must never forget the fact that he is a man and that is a dog, right?
Yes.
That is important in the end. Uh, but there's a few things like that. And Paulson likes to remind people nature is not your friend, right? Like,
Yes.
nature is not. He tells a story, for example, of, and this is why like I've been laughed at by people by going like, I don't go up to deer. Like they go, they're just deer. Why do you care? It's like no, they're very large wild animals,
Yep.
right? Like I don't go up to them. And there was a sign he said where it said "Don't feed the deer," and a little kid had went up and was feeding the deer while his parents took photos, and he ran out of food, and the deer slashed at him with his antlers and killed him.
Ugh.
They said directly next to the sign that said "Don't feed the deer." Uh, and I'm like, yeah. He said that he once got in trouble because after Free Willy came out, you remember that movie,
I
right?
do.
Yeah, after Free Willy came out, which was about them, rescuing an orca whale and bringing him back to the ocean or whatever, right? Uh, he appeared on a radio show and was told to talk, and was asked to talk this as a wildlife expert, right?
Yeah.
And they asked him about like, are they friendly creatures? And like he said, I kind of shocked the radio. I was like, no, absolutely not. He's like, they're called killer whales for a reason. Don't go near them. You know,
Yeah.
he's like, they're very dangerous. You don't want to go near them. He's like, because, they were expecting me to be like, oh, yeah, they're these gentle giants or whatever. And I'm like, no, they're animals,
Yep.
right? Like, they're not your friend.
There was a there was a guy who made a post about look at this ugly animal. You say there's a god, and he shows a picture of a great white shark, and I'm like, what do you mean? This is like the most beautiful killing machine on the planet. It's a great white shark, and yet you can tame a not really tame, but you can turn aside a shark by booping it on the nose, and if you flip it up vertically, it becomes kind of stunned and disoriented. So it's like, yeah, but also, I mean, to do it for a great white shark is it would be pretty impressive. But it's like, nobody's calling these things friendly, wonderful creatures. They're killing machines. But also, it's very much, how could you call these things ugly? How could you use a great white shark as a proof there is no God? This thing's absolutely terrifying, the perfect image of what it should be. It's a similar thing
Yep.
with bears. Like, if you're not Slavic, you shouldn't be approaching a bear. You know, just don't do it. Unless you have your accordion in hand and a half liter of vodka, you are not taming the bear, and you're certainly
Yep.
not taming a bear not native to Russia. Uh, there's also like strict rules you have to follow with every animal. Just because a little Chihuahua, or even something as vicious as a pit bull, is tamer than a coyote, even their play has bared teeth and potential to lose blood. And quite frankly, I fully believe that when an animal tastes human blood, something changes in it. Uh,
I'm not sure. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily true of like domestic animals, but so here's the thing though, there is a difference between tame and domestic,
yeah,
right? Like and domesticated, I should say. A tame animal could be any animal, right? You could tame a lion, you could tame a monkey or whatever. However, a tame animal is very different than a domesticated animal.
Yep.
Tamed means that this particular animal, you can, if you are very careful and know how to interact with it, you
Right.
can, with some expectation of safety, right?
Yeah.
And this is like a very broad thing. However, you should never assume safety. This is
Right.
why, like Siegfried of Siegfried and Roy was mauled by a lion, right?
Yep.
And he'll be the first to tell you that he messed up, and that's why he was, he always said this, right?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's the fact that, like, I could mess up with my dog, and he would not do that to me,
Yep.
uh, right? Like, however, a lion will. Because lions, even a tame lion, is not a domesticated lion.
Yep.
That's why there's a difference. Very few animals are domesticated: dogs, cats, certain birds,
Yep.
uh, certain small rodent type animals like some types of rats and some types of mice and some types of rabbits.
Yep.
Uh, there is also a strain of domesticated fox that exists, but they are very rare and they are only bred in Russia. This is real. Look it up. Uh, you could, and yes, I do want a rare Russian domesticated fox. Uh,
Why wouldn't you?
yeah, it's based as hell. Uh, apparently, and yes, I have looked into this. Apparently, besides the fact that you need to like pay a dude to fly out to Russia to get you this fox, they also have extremely pungent urine and need a very large yard to run around in so that they don't make your house smell. Uh, but you know what? Admittedly, to have the rare Russian domesticated fox, it does sound kind of worth it.
It does.
Uh,
I mean,
so
just
that's
owning a fox in general just does sound worth it.
I mean, yeah, it very much has a, yeah, this is my pet fox, and you just sound cool when you say that you own a pet fox.
Yep.
Uh, but that's neither here nor there. My larger point here is that the horror that I was getting at is the horror of there's a horror in nature, and
Yes.
all horror is rooted in a certain truth, and the horror here is it's the reminder that like I said, there's the pagan idea or the Christian idea. I would say the truthfulness of it, the Christian idea, is this reminder that you are not in control, right?
Yes. Yep.
Humans are not the ones in control. God is the one in control, and God controls nature, right?
Yep.
And that's what we see in To Build a Fire, and that's what you see in uh, any dealings with wild animals. What makes wild animals scary is our lack of control over them, right?
Yep.
Now
I
there is a. Oh, I'm sorry. Go finish.
there's a to me that's even though I absolutely agree and respect it, to me it's not a very like compelling plot if you get me. And not because like I don't love my good animals, and like that Cujo isn't, probably one of Stephen King's better works, because it because it doesn't include things like weird sexual mores. Uh, but it's yeah, it happens. But to me, it's always how do I want to put it? It's impersonal. It's not directly applied. Like even H.P. Lovecraft's um, uh, stuff didn't tend to have a person like even though like Cthulhu does not personally reach out and touch his followers, uh, it's still uh, more personal than getting mauled by an animal because you decided to bother a bear. Like there's a video out there of a man getting mauled to death by a bear, like full stop to finish, and uh, he bothered the bear. Like he didn't just like most of the time, a bear will see you. Even a grizzly bear, an aggressive grizzly bear, if they are well fed, or if it's not like mating season or something like that, if they see you, you do not register as food to them unless they have been trained by dumb idiot people to associate humans with food. You know, but the thing is that you kind of have to walk away. If a bear sees you, turns around, walks away, you don't follow the bear. So there is a full video of a dude getting mauled by a bear because he was dumb and he bothered the bear. So like to me, there's a certain amount of uh, you're in their habitat. Like in most bear maulings and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, congratulations, you're in bear forest, and in bear forest, people get mauled by bears. Uh, Big shocking thing for anybody who hasn't been paying attention.
Yeah, and
You know,
there's also like Jurassic Park. So
yeah,
Jurassic Park has produced a total of one good movie in its entire franchise. However, it is a very good movie indeed. The original Jurassic Park, and it's often forgotten or not appreciated fully that it is in fact a horror movie,
yeah,
right? Uh, in I would say it is some combination of like a monster slash slasher film.
yes,
And I say slasher because of the way that the velociraptors are presented at the end of the film. Uh, right, and it's a great movie, like
yep,
no question. Uh, with that said, to your point, it does kind of bother me sometimes when people, and they do this, and I know you've probably experienced it. People use Jurassic Park to make some kind of real point of like I hear people, for example, scientists are using DNA to try and bring back some extinct creatures like the Tasmanian tiger
right,
and the woolly mammoth, and we're getting close. And you'll hear people go, "No, that's a terrible idea." And I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about? Why is that a terrible idea? That's a great idea."
right,
Like, and I'm like, let me level with you here. In real life, if there were a real Jurassic Park, I absolutely would go.
yeah,
Number one, right? And number
oh yeah,
two, there is literally no reason it would be any more dangerous than a regular zoo. Like, dinosaurs are not super creatures. They're not, they're not magical creatures that can't be killed. They're just animals. Like, we have zoos.
right,
And we have zoos that hold very large creatures. There is literally nothing wrong with having a zoo. Like, dinosaurs are not special in this way. You know,
yep,
like 100%, if there were ever a project for a real Jurassic Park zoo, we should all be in favor of it and we should all support it. Like,
yes,
it's just
and
very, very bizarre
and
that
quite
people take
frankly,
it seriously.
yeah, I agree. And there's like, yeah, and it's like for some of these people, it's like, but you accepted, like gene modified, injections and stuff like that, but you'll like balk at the idea of doing Jurassic Park. What, like you've already crossed that line, you know, you've literally accepted untested genetic modification and injected it into you and your children's children's vein. You don't even understand statistics enough to understand what your real threat of death was. And you're supposed to, I'm supposed to take you seriously about this? It's like, no. You know, most people have no idea what they're talking about. They don't understand the, physics or science or genetics or whatever you want behind it. Uh,
Well, it's just like as if we don't know how to make a zoo, you know.
right.
And then you go, yeah, but this is different. They're dinosaurs. Like, well, why are they different? They're just animals. Like, yeah, T Rexes are big, so are elephants, you know.
Yep.
Um, I don't really
Turns
get
out,
why.
yeah,
Yeah, there's really no reason why we could not have a zoo with dinosaurs.
yep,
And that's the thing, too. The way that the science is going right now, I'm not saying we're near Jurassic Park, but I am saying that there is a possibility of such a thing existing at some point in human history, right? Like, 100 years from now or
yeah.
something, right? Like,
Like
and then
Grandpappy's paying for the whole family to go to Jurassic Park. I'm just gonna say this right now.
oh, 100%, I'm going.
I will
Uh,
sell a kidney for it. Like it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we know the danger. It's awesome. It's worth it.
well, it's like, yeah, we know the danger. It's the danger of going to the zoo.
Right.
Like, It's really, yeah, there is some risk if you're dumb enough to fall in the tiger pit. You know, don't fall in the tiger pit.
We're not here to reinvent Harambe with a T-Rex here.
Yes. With that said, this is all to say that this is not to say that the original Jurassic Park isn't a great movie. It is.
Yes.
Uh, it's worth noting that's the only good Jurassic Park movie because the others are all terrible. Uh,
the
what are you? What would
second
you
one was
try and
pretty
tell?
alright.
Eh, I mean, it's meh at best.
I think it's better than bad. I think it's
I
merely
think
good.
Jurassic World, I will admit, we saw it like in the drive-in as a family years and years, when it came out. And
Yeah,
I will admit that the fight at the end of the movie is pretty dope.
it is.
Uh, but that is literally like the only good scene.
Yep.
Uh, Now, does it justify the existence of the entire movie? No, it very much does not. Uh,
Yeah.
I'll also say that the Jurassic World sequel does have a certain so bad it's good quality to it, because everything that happens in it is so stupid and insane. Uh, that there's definitely, as you watch it, just going like, man, I really want to see what idiotic thing they come up with next. Uh, I got that same vibe with the Multiverse of Madness movie, which was
Yeah.
terrible. Right, like is a terrible movie, but I will admit is not. It's sort of entertaining to watch because like it's bad in creative ways almost,
Yeah.
right? Like
Sure.
you're just watching and going, okay, what absolutely insane thing are they going to do next? And I'll never forget in Mahler's big review of it, him telling the critical drinker about the memory store and the critical drinker nearly having like a mental breakdown trying to process it. So this is
Yeah.
a scene in the movie. I'm gonna do like what Mahler said. So you're a writer.
Yeah.
Uh, you have a very important piece of backstory that you have two characters and you need to find a way to deliver it. You know, and how would you do that?
Oh, sorry. Are you talking to me or were you?
Yeah, I'm asking.
Okay. Uh, they have a memory, and so is there a wizard in the party? Yeah.
Technically, there is.
So there's a wizard in the party, right? Like this Doctor Strange, right?
That's true.
He has access to his magical powers. He has access to a whole storehouse full of magical goods. And you could tell me he can't just open a portal into the quote unquote past. That is to say, open a window that we the audience can look through. Like even if he requires the eye of
Both.
memorandum,
Yeah,
you know,
I get where you're going.
which
So
like it's reasonable for him to one have a magical item that lets you see into memories. It is reasonable two for him to just have this power as a sorcerer supreme, and it's reasonable for him to be able to do it three, uh, because we already accept that he has bullshit powers, and so
okay, so you are correct in one sense of like if Doctor Strange knew that he needed to get a specific memory, force it out of someone, right?
yes,
He could use some sort of magical spell. But I'm describing more that you're a writer and you're like, okay, I want them to start going over their backstories, right?
right,
Like for thematic purposes. So less dramatic than, oh, they have a piece of information that I need to get. More like, as a writer of a movie, I have these two characters and they need to grow and learn more about each other. How do you get that information out? Like,
I got
it,
you. Yeah, like
it,
as a writer, there's tons of opportunities, especially since one of them is a literal wizard.
yeah, I would say the obvious one that you would think of is you have to contrive some way for them to have, a deeper conversation, maybe in the middle of a crisis, right?
Yes.
Make it exciting. Maybe
I
the
thought there
crisis
was like a
prompts
specific memory
conversation.
they needed to pull or something like that.
Yeah, I get you. But that's well, this is how Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness did it. They are transported to a random universe where there are many minor inconsequential changes, like green lights stop and red lights go and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And as they're walking by, they pass the memory store. And as they walk by the memory store, if you step on a specific spot in front of the memory store, it projects your memories. And not only does Doctor Strange step on the memory store spot and you see his memory, his partner then also steps on the memory store. And this their memory is projected onto the street. It was very funny hearing Critical Drinker go, "Wait a minute, are you serious? The memory store?" And he's like, "Well, what if you're having sex with your wife? Like," he goes, "What if you're just taking a shit?" He goes, "I think you just broke my brain." He's like, "This is so stupid. I don't." And he's like, "I can imagine it like a Rick and Morty joke. You could just hear Rick going, 'How is this legal?'" And you absolutely can too.
I
And then he
can.
goes, they said it's the same. It has the same energy of like hearing her going, "No, no, this isn't sorcery. She's using witchcraft, which is completely different." It's like it has the
Right.
same energy, and you could just hear Rick going, "No, no, Morty, it's witchcraft, not sorcery. It's completely different, Morty."
First off,
So
sometimes witches are hot. You ever had sex with a witch, Morty? No, Rick. Why are you disgusting? It's like that. That's the whole thing.
yes, uh,
I saved you
you're
guys half an
absolutely
hour.
right. Yeah. Uh, yeah. The whole point here, though, that I was trying to make is that the multiverse of madness, this is the sort of thing that makes the movie entertaining whenever they have like very basic writing issues. Like if it were me writing this and I wanted my characters to build their relationship, get you would need to have them go through crises so that they trusted each other enough to share information, right? Like
Yeah.
that's how that's writing 101. I'm not saying anything out there.
Yeah.
But the way that the Marvel Cinematic Universe decides to do it is transport you to a universe where the memory store randomly projects your memories when you step on a specific spot, and both of our characters stepped on the spot separately.
Of course. Of
Uh,
course.
this is why Multiverse of Madness, I wouldn't recommend it per se, but it's full of fun moments like this where you go, but why did you choose to do it in the stupidest way possible? Like, you could have done anything else, and yet you chose this.
Right.
Uh, and it's that's why Mahler's review is pretty fun if you like that sort of thing, which I do. I did manage to horrify people by going, yeah, I watched like a 10-hour review of a movie, and they all stared at me. And I'm like, whoa. Like, I go, not at once. It's not like I sat down in a dark room and just played 10 hours. You know, it's like as I'm driving in the background or whatever.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, horror stuff. We got off topic, although
Yeah.
admittedly that was pretty fun.
We're
Uh,
still on the same topic. It's just kind of different. But yeah, it's like there's ways to do horror that isn't just, oh, look at the mysterious town. It's all a metaphor for baby boomers and the greatest generation being a bunch of stiff
you say that, but
jerks.
I'm absolutely doing a story with like that exact theme this
Yeah.
year.
I mean, like, well, you think you've been doing one story. That's one of the main themes of Pinkerton's Ghosts that the previous generations messed up a little bit. You know.
That's true, but I mean, I'm literally having him go to a mysterious town that represents baby boomers.
Oh, good, good, good. Good man. I'm down. Uh, one of the things I'm working on is called Bells in the Dark, and it's set in like quasi Russia, where these kids are nearly poisoned to death by uh, a poisoner, essentially trying to kill their father and mother. And you have a creepy uncle coming back in, who may or may not be just like Uncle Olaf with his serial numbers scraped off. and they bring in a bunch of freaks, magicians, and so on and so forth, and it takes the house from a spiritually wholesome and beautiful place to something that is modern and sort of new age. And as things continue on, the climax that grows up is that the horror is not necessarily all the mysterious things and the ghosts and the strange people that have been brought in by these intruders, but the fact that two out of the three characters are spiritually crashing and burning, and there doesn't seem to be any way to save them. Uh, and of course, the good main character uh, doesn't, isn't able to save them. Uh, the uh, the sort of thing about like spiritual horror to me is not that something bad happens and then you're a junkie or whatever. It's that there has to be this slow build up as well as opportunities to escape the evil that are just not taken. Like it's pretty well known in our own lives and in our spiritual lives that we are given many, 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 many opportunities to repent and come to Christ. I was witnessing to somebody Thursday night, and she had these gay friends who were always running interference whenever I started talking about Jesus Christ. It was like clockwork. You could set an atomic clock by how soon after mentioning Jesus that these guys would come out and be like, "Oh, you gotta come in, stop talking to the weird bouncer." And uh,
Amazing.
I know. And it's like I'm not shocked. I'm like, watch this, and he comes out, and she's like, "Oh." Uh, but it's like when I talk to people when they like bring up this stuff, and it's like, why talk about it? Why care? I'm like, why should I care? Well, I'm like, look, now you don't really have an excuse. You are talking to the one bouncer in St. Louis. Not really. There's plenty of Christian bouncers. But you're talking to the one bouncer in St. Louis who's willing to talk to you about it and is eloquent enough to speak about it at length. You know, well, I know. I'm going to repent when I'm older. I'm like, that's not how it works. And what's going to happen is that when you die, and you're going to say this and say that, it's God's going to point to all the times that you received, the right information, the gospel, and say you refused it there, you refused it there. This random bouncer, you weren't even drunk. You were stone cold sober, and he gave you the whole gospel right there. And it's like you go through it, right? Like you go through the lives of people and you can see where there are opportunities to give up, their spiritual sin and shame, but they keep at it. And to me, that's the most perfect kind of horror is when it's not about a particular monster rising out under the deep. It's when you look at this sort of spiritual sickness. One of the things that make Fantasy so great is the metaphor of the young man of Anados's shadow. And the simple surface reading, which works to a pretty good depth, is that the shadow is self-satisfied cynicism. And in the end, the shadow locks him up and disappears into the waste, dressed in armor. Except Anados is not locked up. The shadow never actually locked the doors, so Anados could walk out whenever he wants. He just couldn't under his own power. And in fact, there are many times when Anados made choices either to break love, break people out of prisons that they should not have been broken out of in the way he did, and not and otherwise open doors that he should not have. And in the end, when he humbles himself and he lives for the love of others, that's when he, becomes this heroic character. But also, when he dies in the story, I mean, he comes back to life and shows up, and apparently he's been missing for 3 weeks, and his sisters are absolutely freaking out when he just shows back up. But it's which I always thought was a great little twist of the story. Like he dies, he is dead. He's stabbed to death by cultists who worship a wolf at the bottom of a pit, and he kills the wolf in his death throes. And he dies, he's buried, he's turned into a flower. The flower gets kissed by the woman he loves, and then his spirit leaves the flower and wanders a bit until he wanders in his physical body out of the forest and back into quote unquote the real world. It is a wonderful story. I love every second of it. It is a story absolutely pregnant with meaning. There's duologies all over the place, mirror images and mirror reflections, and there's few as good as The Shadow of Anados. Because we take these ideas, right? Like the goodness of God, the mercy of God, and the beauty of the world around us, up to and including the horrifying dog eat dog, literally natural world where everything can wants to kill you, and the things that don't can't. Uh, and we can look through it through cynical eyes, but in actuality, cynicism is spiritually sick. It's unwell. It's a byproduct of sin. We can be cynical about great white sharks, for example, like that poster was. But quite frankly, to look at it through a sort of God opinion, right? To view God's as he is, glorious and wonderful, and to give him the proper glory and respect, he made the great white shark, literally forged it to be, the ocean's ultimate killing machine of our generation. And, like, we're not supposed to look on that with wonder and awe and terror. Uh, we're supposed to just kind of ignore this stuff and treat it like it's just an animal. That there's
Yeah,
nothing deeper to it. And to me, that's just flattens reality. Like if you imagine like how deep you can go on things as like a gravitational pull. If you ever read Superluminary, the space vampires and the humans have warp cores, and one of the things they can do is flatten gravity, so you can't escape. You can't play tricks with gravity and warp, right? Like if you flatten your reality, like so that you can't escape the cynical black hole, this cynical worldview that never brings you true joy. It turns princes into scruffy beggar children, and beautiful women into sharp-eyed hookers or whatever your particular fancy is. It destroys the beautiful, the good, the true, the beautiful that God has actually put down. In the end, cynicism also destroys horror, because then because you don't have a good view of what's good and true, you are now forced to see and experience things from that flat nothing matters perspective.
yeah. The thing about good horror is that, as has been pointed out by the wiser among us, is that the truly good horror has meaning, right?
Yes.
I've heard people say that horror demands a happy ending, which I don't agree with necessarily.
Yeah.
Uh, but it does demand an ending in accord with right reason, if that makes more sense,
Yes.
right? Uh, so why does H.P. Lovecraft's work then resonate? Well, because H.P. Lovecraft, in the end, is getting across an actual truth of the matter, which is that if nothing matters and there is no meaning to anything, then the world is a horror,
Yep.
right? Then everything is a horror.
Yep.
That's why his stories are terrifying. And you know what? While he is wrong about nihilism being the correct philosophy, he is right about the implications of such a thing.
Right.
So his stories do present a genuine truth, right?
Yep.
This is where the philosophy of nihilism ultimately will lead you. It will lead you to horror and despair, and it is a complete dead end.
Yep. It.
Right now, the flip side here is that when you have something like Christian horror, uh, I suppose you could say that Christian, yeah. When I say it doesn't demand a happy ending, if a story ends with a wicked man in hell, right?
That's a
That's a horrifying ending.
it's a horrifying ending, and depending on how wicked he was, it might be a good ending for other people.
True. So John C. Wright has a short story that is an excellent horror story.
Yeah,
It is free on his website. I can't remember the title of it, but you might know it if I describe it. It's about a lawyer who performs a satanic ritual to get six wishes from the devil.
I don't know anything about this story
Ooh, I'm gonna find it and I'm gonna link it. It is a
because I was
fantastic story.
I was thinking you were going to go for that one short story about that one god who survived, all the other gods disappearing, and eventually Satan catches up to him and beats him until he's like, "Yes, I will make people disordered. I will destroy them sexually so that they don't know they're men from their women. Ah, yes, but I want more. I will create, so that all, sexual morality is disordered, so that no one can say what is good, what is evil. Incest will rule. Et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, I can't remember what the third one is, but it's absolutely horrible. And because he's this god of wine, he spreads his power through wine, and now must do Lucifer's bidding at the end of time, at our
I do
age.
not remember this one, but
Ooh,
the story that I was thinking of is titled Fate of Fortune. I highly recommend it, though I am going to spoil it.
yes.
Uh, but the Fate of Fortune is a story about a lawyer who performs a satanic ritual to summon a devil. And the reason that the lawyer does this is that he believes now that because he is a lawyer, that he is going to be able to kind of rule, literally rules lawyer his way into having the devil accomplish his wishes exactly by speaking with legal precision, right? So he is arrogant enough to think, well, the problem with other people, they get these monkey's paw wishes, but I won't because I'm a lawyer,
Right.
right? So immediately he is given six wishes, and immediately the devil tricks him into losing three of them, which is pretty funny. Uh, but then the lawyer very calmly, he takes out the piece of paper that he had written and he says, you need to, I wish that you would abide by all of my wishes with exact and give me exactly what I want with no loopholes or whatever. And he gives like the whole speech, and the devil goes, all right, done. And he's like, wait, seriously? He's like, you're gonna, he goes, yeah. And goes, sure, I'll listen to you. He goes, you're not, so he goes, so you're not gonna trick me anymore. The devil goes, nope. It's like, no tricks. So he goes, okay, then I wish that I were a multimillionaire. And he goes, deal. He goes, okay. He goes, so what's the catch? He goes, no. He goes, you're a multimillionaire now. He's like, he goes, so he goes, well, where do you think the money came from? And he goes, don't worry, I didn't steal it all from one person. He's like, wait, you stole it? He's like, of course I stole it. Where do you think the money was gonna come from? And he goes, well, I thought you could like make it. He goes, okay, so that would be counterfeit. He goes, so you would rather I counterfeited the money? It's like, no, I don't want you to counterfeit it. He goes, so you want me to steal it? And then he goes, look, it's one of the two. It's like, I
Right,
don't see why you're so upset about this.
right.
Uh, so he does the whole thing, and then finally, I'm missing a wish. Da-da-da.
Six Wishes, the multimillionaire.
Oh wait, no, I think the first one is the one that says you'll grant all my wishes, and then it turned into he wants to yeah, he wants to be a millionaire, and then the third wish he says, I wish for immortality. And he goes, just immortality, right? He goes, you can't kill me, you can't get rid of me. And then the devil goes, oh, he goes, that is most easily granted. He goes, that's my favorite type of wish. He goes, it is immediately granted to you. He goes, so I did it, and I'm immortal now? He goes, yeah, you want me to prove it to you? And he goes, no, no, don't touch me. He goes, sorry, I don't listen to you anymore. You're out of wishes. And he stabs him in the chest. Uh, and the man dies. He goes, what are you talking about? I'm dead. He goes, you just said I was immortal. He goes, but that's why. He goes, that's my favorite type of wish of all, because you were already immortal, and you are still immortal now. And he goes, and don't worry about your body, for you will get it back. And he goes, I didn't even have to do anything to grant you that wish. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. The quote he uses: "It is our delight when men beg hell for treasures heaven has already abundantly granted."
Yep.
Uh, yes, mortals are all immortal. The torments of my home would swiftly destroy a body of weaker constitution or one made of perishable stuff. Only eternal flesh can endure eternal pain. They say as well that only eternal flesh never wearies of eternal joy, but this I fear you shall not know. Now hear the baying cry of those that come for you, poor imperishable ghosts. The hounds of hell are ale of Celt and red of ear and maw, and they require their sport. And it is better seeming if you are dragged down through the brazen door which opens into the hopeless pit, our realm of woe, but not for an hour yet. It pleases us to let you hope escape, and to toss upon this world's winds for a time, that you may see with fleshless eyes the life which you have lost. Can you outpace pursuit? We, spirit, run and flee, for see, now come the hounds.
Ooh,
The end.
very
Uh,
nice.
Fantastic story. Great little horror story. Very clever. Uh, it's a great story. I would say this is a story with an unhappy ending. I suppose it is happy in the sense that it is in accord with right reason and justice, right?
Yes.
So it's happy in that very basic sense, but certainly no character in the story has ended up in a good place. So in that sense, it is quite unhappy.
There's the story that I saw was Comus, the wine thirst of Comus. Uh,
Oh, I actually did read that once upon a time. Before that.
so at this ending, he is Comus has escaped his prison, and who is implied to be Lucifer, stamps his foot onto Comus's head and says, "You will serve me and adore." Comus turned his head, so now the pressure was on the side of his skull. The boot cleats of adamant crushed one cheek, the soil drove into the other. Mine ear would be more eager for your commands, dread lord, if perhaps their boot sole was not so inappropriately, that is, inauspiciously placed. I loose you from my hand like a falcon to work your will upon the world. What can you accomplish? The touch of this scarred prince flooded the heart of Comus with arrogance and self-conceit, for such was his nature. So Comus boasted. Sodom and Gomorrah will blush for shame, for they made wayfarers their catamites, but dared not blaspheme the sacraments of Hymen, who is mine especial enemy. I shall make Hermaphroditus and Tiresias bow their heads, and even Ganymede, Jove's cantamite, shall wonder at the abominations of love. Such is my will. What else? The writings of whores and images of harlots will be before every eye. Adulteresses will have cheeks of flint never to blush beneath their painted faces, while purest virgins will cower and kill themselves for shame. Such is my will. What else? To the gods of sleep and death I will feed the lotus eaters, and slaves of opium by the myriads. Such is my will. Work swiftly. Time is short. What is the haste, sir? Time is without end. Not for thee, sneered the majestic spirit, for doomed are you to die. Spare me, noble lord. The decree of doom is not mine to recall. All who serve me perish, thus the wage is paid. so on and so forth. It continues on, and the Dark Prince
Yes.
says, "Life is pain, cleave not to it. Instead, seek vengeance. Pour out malice on the happy souls who will escape your fate. Bedevil, confound, corrupt, and torment them, and they will join us in the outer darkness forever, to wail and bewail their misery without cease." And of course, he then goes out to do the will of his master. Though the ending is excellent,
Yes.
and of course, it is a
The
good
epilogue.
the epilogue. Should I spoil it, Anthony?
Uh, I don't know. So the thing about the epilogue too is that, technically speaking, the ending is ambiguous.
It is. It's good.
Uh,
Oh, it's a good ending.
yeah,
I'm linking it
it
in
is a
chat.
wonderful ending, and this is a wonderful story. You're correct. However, it was not what I had in mind when I thought of John C. Wright horror. Uh,
Actually, to me,
I w-
he writes very good horror.
he does. He also has a couple of stories, I think, in Book of Feasts and Seasons. At least one very short one in Book of Feasts and Seasons. His Interestingly enough, his Halloween story is not a horror story. Uh, Although it is quite a good story as well. That's where a man has invented something. He has created a device that allows him to see into different dimensions, right, and communicate with the creatures that live therein. And
Yes,
as he goes through the various dimensions into different levels of reality, he finally comes upon, and he has, by the way, he has entrusted, of course, his trusty manservant to prevent him from being interrupted by people at the door, right?
yes,
Because this is a very important mission. And of course, he has a trusty manservant, as all good mad scientists do. Uh, so he sees into the different levels of reality until finally he reaches one higher, the highest level of all, a very curious level he's never heard before, where three different voices communicate, and they tell him, they go, so I'm going to try and find my copy of Feasts and Seasons, which I should have in my Kindle. Yep. So I want to quote the Halloween story. It is a lovely, lovely story. Uh, this is The Ideal Machine, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. No, that's the wrong one.
Oh,
Um, I swear I know the story. It's a fantastic story too.
I gave away
Uh,
my copy to help the rights out with something, so I cannot help you.
Luckily I have it on Kindle. He has the meaning of life as told me by an inebriated science fiction writer in New Jersey, which is a great story as well. Uh, with a hilarious title. Uh, I feel like it is the ideal machine, and yet it doesn't seem. I feel like I'm missing something. Is it possible that the story was not in Book of Feasts and Seasons, but I think it was?
I cannot recall the story you were discussing.
It's possible that I might be getting the location of it wrong. That maybe it's also on John's website in his in the stories he has posted online as samples. So yeah, the point of the story though is that it ends with the scientist hears three voices and they say, "What shall I do today?" And the second voice says, "I shall go in disguise as the beggar, going door to door and see who shall aid me." And then they go, and if they do not, they go, then they shall be cast into the lake of fire, or something like that. You know. And the story ends with he says that he heard his manservant. He pulls off the device, and then he hears his manservant turning a beggar away at the door, and he says, "I ran down, hoping that there was still time," and that's how the story ends. Uh,
Yes.
it is a wonderful story. Not really a horror story, though, interestingly enough. I think I just misremembered and I got the story wrong, but I wish I could find it now because it's a wonderful story on its own right.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, sometimes John C. Wright is the sort of author that you read his ideas and you wish you were as smart as he was.
Yes.
Uh, you know what I mean. You get this like that's such a great idea that I wish that I thought of it. Uh, like, but yeah, when as I'm going through, my old story, so the way that I view horror, for Pinkerton's Ghost, I view horror in one of two ways. Uh, every now and then, and me more than you and Ken, which is not always great, but also gives my stories a bit of an identity. I have some non-horror stories,
Yeah.
though not a ton, but some, right?
Right. Never too
But
many. It's always
yeah,
focused in the end.
yes. But the way that I view the horror is in one of two ways. Either it's going to be what I think of as B movie adventure horror. I don't want to use the word schlocky exactly. That's not quite what I mean. But in that vein, where the goal is less to horrify and more to give you that B movie feel of like, oh, this is how I think of as horror, and I could use it to tell an adventure story, right?
Yes.
Uh, a good example of this would be like Molly Maguire's, right? Uh, Molly Maguire's is a ghost story, and it is my personal favorite that I have written so far. Uh, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, but it's my personal favorite. And it is a ghost story, but it's not really particularly horrifying. With that said, the fact that it is a ghost story, right, and draws on what is most definitely a traditionally horror trope gives it like a B movie horror quality. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Uh, and the other end of the spectrum is when I am genuinely trying to horrify. So I am trying to scare you. A good
Yes.
example of this sort of a story that I think was pulled off pretty well would be something like I had one in mind and I just blanked out. Rats actually is a good one.
Yes.
So Rats I consider a genuine horror story. Uh it was written with the intention of scaring you, right? Like
Yes.
not necessarily. I don't expect anybody to be reading it and be like, "Wow, that was the scariest thing I've ever read."
You
But
never
you
know
should have
when
come
a
at
rat is going to be piloting you like a Gundam.
yes. Uh but you should have come out of the story with this idea of like, some genuinely terrifying things happen in Rats.
Yes.
And I say this not like terrifying like you should be terrified when you read it, but objectively when you like name what's going on, it's quite horrifying,
Yes.
right? Uh So Rats is a story that I consider to be like a real horror story. Or Dark Side of the Mind is another one where the big reveal in Dark Side of the Mind is that the alternate universe's version of Sean Russo had killed Violet Hunter. That he
Yes.
was watching Sean the entire time, that he was looking for an opportunity to strike and kill him, and that he leaves and sends people after Sean because he recognizes Violet Hunter, and the memory of what he did becomes so fresh and raw that it horrifies him into leaving. I consider this quite a horrible revelation, at least in like to me, this idea that you go to another universe and it's like your sins are present in front of you and you
Yes.
can't escape from them, right? You know, that this is a woman who he killed for power. That
Yes.
he and now here she is alive and not only alive but in a relationship with another universe's version of him. It's like seeing what you could have been,
Yes.
you know, in the
Which is
flesh in front of you.
which is a horrible thing to consider. Just because I know what horrible, no good, terrible decisions I've made. Both abusing my body and becoming fat and all this other things like that. And then you think about the fact that God did not make us to be clinically obese or anything like that. It does have a certain horror of I'm not what I could be. There's, occasionally I run into, well-meaning people at church and whatnot. It's like, oh, Ben, aren't you married or something? It's like, no, I made terrible choices when I was young. It doesn't work out. Uh, and you look at it and you think, well, if I was a perfect being in God's perfect plan, who knows what it could have been, but I would be more useful to God, more able, to refuse sin and all this jazz, able to modify, in the sense of, like obesity, because you can see that, right? Inner problems do portray themselves outwardly. Was Somebody said it very well. Somebody said it very well, and it's frustrating me because I can't remember the phrase. It's like uh, the outer the outer body reflects the inner spirit, or something like that. And
Yeah, I get what you mean.
and I made a joke that Adrian Tchaikovsky looks like the creepy non-blood related uncle who creeped on your mother, and now that after the funeral creeps on your sister. He has a very strange look to him. But what am I to complain about? I'm fat. I desire food above many different things.
I am
Therefore
so
therefore my gluttony, portrays itself outwardly as obesity, and this is true for everyone in their own way. You've
yeah.
seen misers who are very thin. Why are they very thin? Because their love of money makes it even too precious to spend on food, because of the abuse of our God-given, natures and talents, which is a part of the sin nature, and
Now, I will
it
note here that this is not necessarily the most healthy way to look at like the
what?
world you're past or whatever. Now, well, what I'm saying
I'm
is
kidding.
I'm serious to a point of
Yeah.
like looking at the world in terms of what could have been,
Yes.
right, is not necessarily the healthiest way to look at it. But that's what makes it a good horror idea,
Oh,
right? Like,
absolutely. Like
and
what I'm saying is that like it causes, a certain amount of torment just to know that you can always be better.
this is probably, I would imagine, the principal torment of hell, right?
Yes.
Is the idea that you didn't need to be here, right?
Yep.
Like you had every chance to leave and you didn't. I think that that's probably going to be the thing is that everybody who ends up in hell, when the I'm trying to think of the word for it, when all of the things are obscuring our sight in the flesh, the things that allow us to make excuses.
Yes.
Now we're spirit, we're only spirit. The flesh is gone. That's stripped away, right? And we
Yep.
realize the truth. That's going to be a horror to a lot of people. And
Yep.
when they realize that the excuses they were making, they truly cannot deny anymore were poor excuses. And I do think that a lot of that in hell, everybody is going to deny it, but everybody will know, right?
Yep.
Everybody will know that they did not have to be there. It's and that's the horror I was trying to get at with Evil Sean. I consider that story to be one of my most horrifying ideas, and
Oh yeah.
I don't know if anybody even noticed it, but like I did, right, at the time, and I still think it came out quite well. Uh,
I agree.
like the idea of dark side of the mind was this idea of you're an evil person who has made evil decisions, and you did it for the sake of power, but now you're in the world and you see what could have been if you had not made those decisions, right?
Yep.
It is staring in front of you, a person living, right, that
Yes.
you killed, and that you killed because you wanted to power, right?
Yep.
You didn't kill it for any other you didn't kill for any other reason. You
Yep.
killed for yourself, and she's not even dead. And it doesn't matter that it's not the same person. It's what it could have been, and the
Yep.
fact that she is in a relationship with you, right? Not really you, but it's
Yes.
like, could this have been me,
Yes.
right? Like,
The love of a beautiful and devoted girl, who's a good match. It's like, and then you look at it, and it's like, ugh, you have to be introspective at that point.
Right, exactly. And I think if you're a truly evil, if you're an evil person, right? I don't think that there's, the whole idea behind evil Sean, and which is what I call him, but is that he is ultimately still a living human, right?
Yep.
Like, uh, this sight of what could have been is horrifying to him because ultimately there's still a capacity for good, even if it's like it's buried deep enough that his immediate reaction is to try and kill them both, right?
Yep.
Like, which is what he does. And yet, it's like a Flannery O'Connor story. The very fact that he reacts with such violence shows that there is something there that recognizes the evil that he did.
Yes.
You know, if he truly didn't care, if it really didn't matter to him, then why would he react so violently?
Yep.
It wouldn't mean anything at all. But it does mean something because we're all human, right?
Right.
Uh, and when we have the capacity to continue to make choices, you can choose good or evil. Now, evil Sean's immediate reaction is to violently recoil further into evil rather than face the fact that he did something bad. You know, really,
Yes.
really bad. Uh, and that was one of my favorite things from the second season, which is the Special Forces arc, where
Oh yeah.
Violet needs to be spirited away by another Pinkerton agent, and Sean takes on an entire group of Special Forces agents with the help of Jack. Uh,
Yep.
it was a fun storyline to do, but it's a turning point for a lot of people, right?
Oh yeah. Like it starts to change the characterization. From
Yes.
something that might be a little bit static to something that's quite frankly, what they'll need to be to survive in the future, but also like what the depths of a character are. One of the things that kind of is a disappointment is that the voice actor for the guy who spirited Violet away has not returned to do another episode, and it frustrates the heck out of me because I have to find a new voice actor.
Uh, yeah, that's life, though. You gotta deal with these sorts of disappointments every now and then.
It's easy for you to
Yeah,
say. You're not the one who spent several hours writing it.
I know.
Cool.
You're right. It is easy for me to say. Uh, okay, yeah, but that's my approach when writing these things. And sometimes, like these sorts of B movie stories, can be fun. Like, I sort of like the idea of the Revolutionary Part One and Part Two when Sean travels back in time.
Yep.
I mean, is there a horror aspect there? Yeah, sort of, right?
Yeah.
Like you're dealing with a essentially some sort of mad scientist villain who's trying to change the past, you know. But I use it as sort of a jumping off point for like a B movie plot, right?
Yeah.
And I like these sorts of stories. They can be fun in their own right. But and I will certainly be doing more of them. You know, like I'm not going to just stop entirely. However, it is worth knowing that Pinkerton's Ghost ultimately is more horror than adventure in the end, right? While we
Yeah.
have elements of other things. Uh, like our season finale, for example, was absolutely a horror finale. It was horror in the purest sense, not B movie schlock horror, but true. This is meant to make you scared horror,
Right.
right? Like you and even when I say things like it's meant to make you afraid, it's not necessarily like I'm not necessarily counting on the listener to actually finish the story and actually be terrified at any point. More that clearly as you read it, like this is the sort of I don't know how to explain it except to say like this is the emotion that we're trying to
Yes.
capture in the story, right?
Yep.
We're trying to capture the feeling of fear. Uh, since both of us are losing our voices, I feel like it would be good for us to end here. So, anything you want to add, or would you want to push back on me and keep going to 9?
Sorry, I had to deal with something. No, it's the only thing I say is, try to keep the horror out of your own life. I firmly believe that the more ordered we are towards the spiritual things of Christ, the less uh, danger we're in.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's the long and short of it.
And next week,
Next
should I
week,
mention who? Should I mention who we're interviewing? Is it official?
yeah, I mean it should be anyway. It's just,
Isaac Young.
yep, this is his second
Yay!
appearance. He was pretty good on the interviews. He's had some viral tweets. Uh, I think he'll be a good time. I will not be here the entire time. All right, guys, have a good night.
Yay!
Come again next
Any
week. And yeah.
boy, that was an